our women. This is where we place our women. We are not a priority. So one of the things, because when we talk about addressing some of the immediate issues, police brutality, we have had serious cases of police brutality, sexual violence against women that has not been investigated. What happened here at the University of Nairobi when they were raided by the police, students who were not even part of this demonstration, in their hostels, in their classrooms, were clobbered, allegations of sexual violence, and nothing from the religious leaders, nothing from our institutions, silence. And then the university goes ahead to open the university once again without calling for investigations, students' alleged deaths, and nobody says anything. The violations, the heavy-handedness, and the clear attack on Kenyan citizens, the skewed police response. How many women have lost their children in their homes, tear-gassed, babies clobbered in their homes, silence from the religious class. So these are violations against Kenyan citizens. Kenya is a multi-party democracy. Supporting the opposition cannot be criminalized. But the state has criminalized support for the opposition because we have seen a heavy-handed response and a skewed approach to policing and police response. Why is there silence about this? And who are the people who suffer the most? The women. The doctors have left here. There is still a doctor here. The nurses strike. The doctors strike. When our healthcare system is broken, women become the primary healthcare givers. Okay? How many children? What are the consequences? Have we even tried to think about what the consequences of the nurses' strike are? Because we are seeing it only in context of money. But we are not looking at it in context of the things that have gone unattended. Children that have not been vaccinated. Mothers who have died. Children below the age of 5 who have died from preventable sicknesses. How many Kenyans have died? How many people, how many homes have been rendered motherless? How many people have lost their breadwinners because of this, just the health crisis? Health is guaranteed under the socio-economic rights in the Bill of Rights. This must also be addressed. The militarization of women by the ruling party. How is it that people have remained silent when women are dressed in battle fatigues? Are they going to war? What are you talking about? I mean, what are we talking about? Are women going to war? Have the opposition, have citizens become enemies? And they are using women to do this, and we remain silent. When we speak against it, we are called NASA. In fact, it is being a NASA supporter or being non-aligned is criminal, has been criminalized. But how do we keep silent when we see women dressed in battle fatigues? What are we saying? And we say that we are going to war. We are going to war with who? When did politics become war? When did elections become war? And how do we keep silent when our state then uses women to become the symbol of war against its own citizens? How is that even acceptable? These are things that we must discuss because it is a very wrong picture where the women have been captured. So for me, these talks must be all-inclusive, but at and not to say that each group will bring in 1/3 of the women. No. You must recognize women as a sector on their own. And then each group must bring 1/3 of women. So that we have our sector as women, and each of you, including the religious group who always tell us that they don't know where they are going to get women from, yet most of your worshippers are women. Yes. So, yes, because the religious group are notorious in saying that they have no women. You will find the women, even if they are washirikas, you will bring them. But each group must have this. must be a standard practice. This one we must demand that each group that will be represented in the talks must bring at least a third, a minimum of a third women. It would be good if you do 50-50, you know. But women must be recognized as a standalone sector. When we are talking about electoral justice, we must look at the issue of exclusion, okay? We must look at the issue of exclusion. We must look at the issue of campaign financing, because that is part of this exclusion, where it has become a money contest, and they are not, the political class is not willing to moderate the amount of money that goes in, so that it is a money contest and not an issues-based context. The other thing is, we must also address the issues of the economic crisis that we are in, and we must speak candidly about state capture, because state capture is affecting productivity, okay, in this country. We are in a crisis. The cabinet secretary for Treasury yesterday all but admitted that they've run out of money, okay? We have had a government that has been borrowing carelessly. We need to find out what have they done with this money. Parliament must be taken to task, because they will tax us to return that money. We cannot allow for our taxes to be misused and for the continued irresponsibility by government to spend haphazardly without a care for future generations. And this we speak also as women, because much as we are not recognized much, we are taxpayers. We pay taxes. So we must address the issue of the productivity, because this productivity, unless it is addressed, those 12 million jobless Kenyans who have nothing to lose, who are ready to stop a bullet, because at the end of the day you are perhaps even doing them a favor, because their existence is a punishment, a daily punishment, that is not going to be addressed. So the other thing, Ambassador, you know, you can't call me last and then restrict me. I'm almost done. The other thing that we must address is the issue of fake news. Right. Let me tell you, at a time like this, reliable information is very, very important. We are in a crisis. Any kind of fake news can trigger a very bad response. But what should worry us even more is that our government has become purveyor of fake news. Okay? And we must investigate. There are allegations that there is a company that has been procured to generate fake news to create certain perceptions. This cannot be allowed, because it attacks our nationhood, but undermines the democratic ideals that we are trying to build as a country. And so when your government becomes purveyor of fake news, then you are in trouble, because you don't know what is truth. I'm not saying that we restrict freedom of information or that we restrict the freedom of expression, but it is important that we have reliable information. So the issue of fake news must be addressed. The state must stop this disinformation campaign. That must be stopped completely. And I know that the opposition, even the politicians, have been part of it. But for me, it is worrying when our state is the one in the forefront of being, you know, the purveyor of fake news. We need proper reporting. Yes, yes. And also the other thing is the shrinking civic space. The culture of fear, as Martha said, has come back to haunt us. And the people being targeted are civil society. Civil society have been marked as enemies. And you know that one of the things in our elections, unfortunately, is that there's always an enemy that is targeted, okay? We must always create enemies for us to have an agenda. And aside from NASA being an enemy, civil society have been made into an enemy. They have coined a phrase, evil society. And they continue with the disinformation campaign against civil society and clamp down on those civil liberties, the rights and freedoms of civil society. But I want to tell you something, that this is not just civil society space. It is our rights, your rights. Tomorrow, bishop, pastor, when your church begins to speak out against the state, it can be banned. That's actually how real this thing is. Tomorrow, they can say to Shauriane, cannot meet, because you are subversives. you know? Yes. So don't see it as them. It is not about them. It's about all of us. Those guarantees are for all of us. I have a right to dissent. I have a right to tell my government it is wrong when it is wrong. And the government has no right to muzzle me or to weaponize the state against me. The state is supposed to work for me. It's not supposed to identify me as an enemy. So I think that I will close by saying, as women are hurting, but women are also afraid. We don't have very many people who are ready to stand up and say what needs to be said. People speak in hushed tones. We must also have a word with our development partners, because I think our development partners have also been partial, in the way they have approached issues. But I think on this one, as the doctors, as Dr. Kitulu told us, that we need to be together on this. Don't look at civil society and say, leave those civil society people. Those civil society people, we are Kenyans. We cannot look at the disabled and say, we don't know what they are bringing. These women, they always have. We have to speak with one voice. And if Tushariana is going to do anything, I hope that it is going to bring all of us together. We are part of Kura Yangu, Sauti Yangu. We are part of We the People. We are part of the Dialogue Reference Group. We are everywhere. And we will not be silenced. And we demand inclusion for women as a standalone sector, and for your sectors to bring in women, so that the women's perspective must also be on this table, and that any discussions we have going forward, whether it is about how we are going to shape this nation, we want to shape it together. Finally, I want to say this. This dangerous precedent that we are setting, because I've heard it said that, there are those who, there's those who feel that we should endorse, we should move on. Kenya needs to move on. Forget about this elections thing, to mechoka. I think that it's important for us to realize that elections, the Constitution says that the sovereign power belongs to the people. The one time we get to exercise our sovereign power is through the electoral process, where as Kenyans we determine who will represent us in the various levels. So we don't do it for our own amusement. It is a very key process in manifesting the will of the people. For as long as we allow for the criminal manipulation of the will of the people, simply because there are people who have an entitlement to power, then we are going down a slippery slope. We must not allow electoral fraud to be the basis upon which the state is won as a prize. Because for as long as we do that, we allow then, we are not going to stop them then from perpetuating this fraud further. And so I think that we need to have an agreement on what it is that we stand for. There are people who are afraid to take a certain position lest they be seen leaning towards NASA. But if NASA are saying that that is what needs to happen, then on that issue NASA are correct. NASA are not saints. But if we are in agreement on that we cannot allow for electoral fraud to be the basis upon which you acquire the levers of power, then we must all agree that that must be the position. Because really, you can't ask an entire nation to unsee what we have seen. We all know what's going on. We just need to call it out. Thank you.
Again, I know from when we started at 8 or so, there's been quite a bit of diversity. The only group that has not spoken about is the youth, and I'm not going to invite you to come and talk. What I would do then is to try and summarize the way forward, because I think it's important. Perhaps then the youth, in that context, I will allow you to suggest the way forward, not to come and talk. If you can then say, now, this is what I see emerging from what has been said. One, we have already painted the picture of where we are. And I dare not go through that, because then you will start telling me, you missed this, you missed that, of where we are. And I want to thank Cyprian for what he did, particularly in suggesting the post scenarios of where we are, depending on the outcomes that will come. You could end up with the same status, as we are today. That has consequences. You could take a different route. It has consequences. You can take a middle road. It has consequences. Now, then, I think to me, one of the big things to carry from Cyprian's presentation was we need now to get the process going forward. And if you remember, you listen to him carefully, says, don't front load the issues if you want to get the process. And I can tell you that's for a fact. That's true. That is at least one experience I've learned in life. And one of them that I've learned in life is that don't allow too many processes to take place in any conflict situation. The moment you allow too many processes, that is a recipe for, guaranteed failure. So then how do we now move forward? If we really want, are we all agreed that we now need a national conversation? He said, if you call it dialogue, people will say what? A national conversation or dialogue, I don't know who used that word. If we need it, then how do we now move forward? He even suggested that we start with identifying, say, mediators or elders or wise people. In fact, one of the things that you noticed that the African Union started to use is we created the council of a panel of the wise. People still said, well, what do you mean these wise are they only the gray-haired or whatever? But it helps a lot. And by the way, many people don't realize they do a lot at night because they are not the kind of people that want to be in front of cameras, to come and say, I've met President so and so, this is what we discussed. There are people you don't even want to know they were there. We tried it just before 26th for some of the elders to come and help us to say, please, don't go into this election with this kind of environment, but I'm not sure we succeeded, and I don't want to go into that. So I'm crystallizing to that to say, do we then, if we agree that national dialogue is important, yes, let's move forward, then how do we get the people that will initiate it? How do we then bring together all these dialogues around? From everybody that has said, I've been part of with the people, I've been part of Tushauriane, I've been part of even in limited groups. It's true. The fact that all these groups exist, it shows that it's demand-driven. People have recognized there's a problem. That's why there are many initiatives. The answer then is, how do we harness the ground so that we can all come together, and who can be able to bring a smaller group of all these leaders, they agree, and then convene us so that we can have a bigger conference. That is what I would propose by way of agenda now. And so if we can start harvesting those areas where we agree, let us agree to work towards a national dialogue, national conversation. Now, how do we identify the people? How do we bring together all these processes? And what timelines do we work with? Because that's very important. Because I hear you saying, if you wait until the verdict is out, perhaps you will have missed the boat in certain scenarios. If you are working towards that verdict, that it means then this inclusive dialogue must take place within a space of time. So we live here convinced that we are going to convene each other, and then start. You don't have to serialize it. You can, scale the ladder and chew your gum. So we can then start saying, okay, can we identify individuals that can help us to start contact groups? Another thing that we would suggest in that summary, so that we can then conclude not just a summary, but an action plan as we live this scenario. And let's work towards some time. It's 1:30. I don't know what you propose.
Mutaba Musimi, same. Professor Lukoye Atuoli, happy that the colleagues from the medical profession are here. Dr. Senator Zani, ODM Secretary General. We did invite Secretary Generals of the major coalitions. She's out of the country. Having said that, Mzee Moody just said 5 things which are summarized.
Okay.
First, he says we acknowledge the leaders need to acknowledge we are in a crisis. Secondly, he recognizes there are problems with economic, the clamping down on certain companies. He says if there's a problem with, maybe it's a problem with a manager at Safaricom, but when we boycott, you affect everybody. Maybe at Bidco, it's the CEO. When you sabotage, it's not the CEO who suffers. He goes further and says, we only punishing the simple person when that happens. He further says that the talk of transferring jobs to, say, Airtel, it doesn't work so easily. He also says the talk of cessation, when the rest of the world is talking about unification, is not the way forward. But he says that notwithstanding, we must acknowledge there's a problem. He further, in conclusion, says the problem is not Uhuru or Raila, but the people around them. So we must find a way of reaching the people around them. So I think there's one solution there from Mheshimiwa Mudi.
Okay. Thank you very much for that message of some of the elders that would have been with us. Can we use some of this? And I wanted us then to build on the conclusion.
Something for this country. We all come together. I believe this kind of conversation needs to involve the 40 million Kenyans. And if not all, even representatives of the different constituencies, we need to have them on board. So as a starting point, let's just see who is doing work around negotiation, mediation, the dialogue. Let's come together. I know there are different teams of mediators that have been constituted, be it at the national, be it at the county, the religious sector. Let's bring all these people together. Then I'm looking at the political class. Since we are where we are today because of the political class, we need to also have a multi-pronged approach on how we target them. If you're looking at the top leadership of the two big parties, who has the trust, who can access the principles in the two big parties at the moment, who can speak to them? Then who are the advisors around the principles? We need to target that constituency because they are the advisors to the principles. So if we could also map out who are the people who can influence to help the toning down, bring down the temperatures, because we have a country. So this is my humble plea that let's try and use multiple pronged approach. There is a wealth of information, there are wealth of resources, Kenyans here who are willing to work for this country.
Can we choose the 3 people from this group, like Cyprian, Mule, and even Mumbi, the rest of them? Then they are willing, they are here. They can form the 3 groups. Then the other 3 names that were being suggested, when the dialogue, we had the dialogue going, we first started. Then we can bring in the other peace builders as, for example, just speakers, but they don't have so much role to play, so that the main processes is run by the people in this meeting. Then it will kick off. But if we stay here and start questioning names, everyone will have a name. And to settle on 3 names will be very difficult. But when we start now, we say, for instance, you and you and you, can you be the 3? Yes. Then when the process starts, we can bring in 1 at a time, even 2 at a time, any number. But if we want to sit here and talk about the 3 numbers, I don't think we are going to settle on any, because you'll hear someone wants this, the other one wants this, and all of them are peace builders. And you can find, we now propose the 3 names, we leave it at that. Then you go approach the person is not willing to, because you know the internal conflict. You'll tell someone, come and join us, be among the 3 people. Then he or she will tell you, no, I'm aligned to this party, and if I go here and they see me there, they'll call me a mole, and they'll not agree. So let's just, if it's possible, that's what I think.
Okay, thank you so much.
We want to thank you and to bless your holy name. We thank you, Father, for the deliberations that have gone on, and we thank you because we know that you care for us and that you love us. We thank you for everyone who has made themselves available to have this discussion. We pray that you will lead